property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
New Orleans is in the path of another major hurricane. Tropical storm Ida, swirling in the Caribbean, is expected to strengthen into a Category 3 storm before making landfall on the Gulf Coast Sunday.
Anybody who is in that cone, roughly from Houston all the way over to Mobile, Alabama, obviously they should have their hurricane supplies and hurricane plan in place.
Dennis Falcon at the National Hurricane Center. In the West, wildfires still causing havoc.
The pictures of the Lake Tahoe Basin where thousands live are filled with hazy, dark smoke. At more than 135,000 acres, the Caldor fires already destroyed more than 600 homes and other buildings as crews work frantically to stop the fire from heading toward Lake Tahoe. Incident meteorologist Jim Dudley says the wind, thankfully, is going to stop.
We're going to have very light winds aloft. Therefore, up on the ridge tops and on the very critical east side of the fire, we're not going to have the aiding effect of the south winds moving, trying to push the fire that direction.
Dry, breezy weather, though, is expected for much of the Great Basin, Sierra, and Central Rockies as 92 large fires continue to burn across the West. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
And college football's Pac-12 announces it's done with expansions for now.
The unanimous decision coming just days after the Pac-12, Big Ten, and ACC announced an alliance that ultimately aims to stabilize a volatile environment throughout college athletics. Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkov focused on helping the current schools in his conference.
It makes me incredibly happy and prideful to meet the student athletes that we get to do our work for the benefit of.
This announcement from the Pac-12 is actually good news for the Big 12 as they look for viable options to expand, with both Texas and Oklahoma heading to the SEC in 2025. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
And I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Starting August 1st, pandemic unemployment assistance claimants must start searching for work to remain eligible for PUA benefits. 3 work searches a week are required. Work searches include registering on HireGuam.com, meeting with employers, submitting resumes and applications, and attending job fairs. Only a few are exempt from the work search requirement. This includes those working reduced hours, those in training programs, and self-employed individuals. Remember, PUA ends September the 4th. Now is the time. Let's rebuild our workforce. For more information, go to dol.guam.gov.
Pastrami is back at Subway. Pepper-crusted beef layered with crispy pickles, mustard, and melted provolone cheese. Nothing comes close to the pleasure of sinking your teeth into that chewy, juicy, well-seasoned pastrami. It's happiness in a sub. Head down to the nearest Subway restaurant and satisfy your craving for the deli perfection that is pastrami. Subway. Eat fresh. Pastrami sub is available at all Subway locations on Guam and Saipan, including NCS for limited time only.
Here at Guam Auto Spot, we have the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars. Like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage. As low as $127 per paycheck, 0 down. Or this 2021 Buick Encore. As low as $237 per paycheck, 0 down for 72 months. Call 478-AUTO to schedule a test drive or get pre-approved online at guamautospot.com.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
So here we are. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And if you've been tuned in and watching Facebook, I was not practicing some new dance a minute ago. I wasn't able to adjust my stool, and I'm still not able to adjust it. But that's all right. Still, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
It may show up on TikTok later on today, Bob.
Okay. Yeah. And well, it may
Brand new dance.
It may become a new craze. Bob and the stool dance, right?
Have you seen that show, Tall Tales? They're teaching dances now.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's start out here with Zemi Ikotny. And I will make short shrift of the editorial because there's a rebuttal to yesterday's editorial. Our view, initiatives needed to provide visitors with memorable experiences. Memorable experiences. How about the Red Queen closing down the island? Would that be a memorable experience? Guam has taken the first step in reviving the local tourism industry, which was devastated by the Wuhan virus pandemic. One of the biggest challenges outside of convincing more visitors to come here is providing experience for those that do visit the island. The government of Guam can be a huge help by helping get tourist-related businesses on their feet. Well, that's for sure.
You don't say.
Yeah, what's challenging, and we're hearing this in volumes from the Taiwan visitors who are visiting Guam today, is there's nothing to do on the island. Close to 8 o'clock, everything is basically closed. Some of the restaurants are shutting down early. The optional tours don't exist. The shopping malls are closing early. The big DFS Galleria isn't open yet. Sam Shinohara, chairman of the government's recovery task force, told the Rotary Club of Tumon Bay Tuesday. Shinohara is managing director for United Airlines and on the board of the Visitors Bureau, wants the tourism agency to provide more resources to help businesses reopen for tourists. I really want to spend time and effort to figure out how we can help these businesses start to open their doors. Shinohara is right. It's important for those who do visit Guam to want to come back. It's important that they share memorable, fun experiences of Guam with their families, friends, and coworkers. I think that however many people come in are probably our most important customers because they're going to tell the story. Shinohara wants GVB to give them the tools and the resources to kind of help things go. Get them excited about cleaning up their front yard or their backyard. How about the roadsides? You know, the Marine Corps Drive between Dededo and Jigo is starting to look like a botanical garden again. They had, the last time they went in and did any work on the side of the road, they had trees with 2.5-inch trunks growing alongside the road.
Yeah, we didn't plant any trees there.
Yeah. Economic recovery needs to be a primary concern, and there's no way around it. Tourism is the key component to any plan to rebuilding the Guam economy. Elected officials need to work with GVB and the tourism industry on initiatives that will provide our visitors with memorable experiences during their stay. Well, how about if we quit jacking around the businesses? Now you can open. Oh, no, now you can't open. Yeah. Businesses may open. May I open my business? You didn't say Simon says or Mother or the Red Queen says, so no, you can't open your business. So it must be terribly frustrating for businesses. And then, you know, when she says, okay, you can open, she gives them no notice at all, as though everybody is all the employers are standing around the front door. Nothing needs to be ordered, etc. So we have an extremely anti-business climate here while we're dealing with this Wuhan virus. And I agree, you know, tourists don't come down here just to watch TV. They can watch TV at home. Probably TV in their own language so they could understand it. Okay, the Daily News ran a column, was it yesterday? Yeah, if scientific reasons to vaccinate aren't good enough, listen to Pope Francis. So Jungle Watch, our friend Frenchie over at Jungle Watch comes back and says this: when local media uses the Pope as a prop to support the immoral and the illegitimate, which is long, the Guam Daily News, which has long been a mouthpiece for certain very identifiable political leaning, outdid itself today. That would be yesterday. Trying to come to the rescue of the questionable governing by decree of Governor Lulian Guerrero Cook, the editorial board of the Daily News decided to enroll the support of Pope Francis to justify the immoral and illegitimate segregation of one part of the population and the vilification and division of Guam's population. Government by fear, aided and abetted by what is loosely called the local press. Using dubious, poorly argued facts which the population at large has been bombarded with since the proclamation of the manipulated medical emergency, the PDN hammers away at the Catholic faithful who so far have refused to bend the knee to manipulated science and false gods. In doing so, they did what most hypocritical and profoundly anti-Catholics usually do. They argue around moral teachings. What the Pacific Daily News does in this argument around moral teachings with their shameless distorting enrollment of Pope Francis amounts to such a high level of hypocrisy that we had to make an official statement against what is false and flawed Catholic teachings. In introducing their argument, the editors make several assertions that are either arguable or completely false and advance them as science, which they are not. Let's review the assertions. First, the vaccines are safe. Developed by using science has been around for decades, according to CDC. We know that was wrong yesterday. These vaccines, the vaccine safety has not been proven so far. The CDC and the FDA have refused to release statistics about side effects and death attributed to the vaccines. As of now, only 3 nations worldwide and 1 territory, Gibraltar rocks, have published their studies. These studies are subject for debate because the results they show are not encouraging regarding the usual safety levels of vaccines. The claim that science has been around for decades is itself a white lie, since these vaccines have nothing in common with traditional vaccines but are rather a new and untested approach of activating RNA to trigger an autoimmune reaction from the plaintiff as your patient. RNA biology and RNA synthesis are a fairly new field of research related to genome sequencing. It has possible applications in the field of oncology, fibrosis, and NGS technology. Some of the challenges with RNA biology are modification and purification. There are several sub-studies of RNA, notably mRNA, tRNA, small RNA, incRNA, and so on. It's hardly what the PDN is wrongly advancing by hiding behind edited work from the CDC. Here lies the problem. Too many people since the beginning of said pandemic have manipulated and massaged the very little available science allowed to be shared to making it fit in their narrative. This is exactly what the governor has done by pretending to listen to her medical advisory board, pretending, which we now know is a lie. And this is exactly what the Daily News continues on doing despite its change of ownership. The vaccines, and here's the second one, the vaccines are effective, preventing preventing most from contracting and spreading the virus. Another white lie from PDN. Well, the vaccines were fairly effective against the original variant of the virus. Their efficacy with the Delta variant, which we are experiencing on Guam now, and the Epsilon variant is drastically less effective, almost by half. This is the reason that Big Pharma is now recommending a third booster shot to prevent contracting the new variants. Furthermore, the viral loads of vaccinated people is 40 to 50 times higher among vaccinated individuals than among non-vaccinated people, making them more likely to spread the virus around them. This fact in itself negates the value signaling and shaming argument to vaccinate to protect, quote, the people you love, coworkers and others in the community. Next one. The vaccine is also effective against the Delta variant, which CDC states causes more infections and spreads faster. Again, another white lie, since the CDC also states that the virulence and severity of the Delta variant is also much less serious. Please refer to the previous argument about Delta and Epsilon variant. After this initial introduction of white lies and half-truths, the PDN decides to be condescending and insulting. The level of anti-Catholic feelings expressed by the editorial board of PDN cannot be hidden. Our obvious contempt, resentment, and hatred oozes from behind their poorly disguised, reasonable face mask. Even the way the phrasing is done is contemptuous. It's actually what reveals the ugly truth behind the mask. Here it is. If those simple, sensible reasons are not good enough reasons to convince the Catholic community on Guam to get the vaccine, how about this one? The Holy Father says it's a good idea. Yeah, sensible, simple, sensible reason. No. Let's look at this closely. The way the phrase starts is implying that Catholics that refuse to bend the knee in front of failed temporal powers are, of course, against reasonable scientific arguments. This is the old Marxist charade that religion is obscurantist by nature. Of course, these arguments are also simple. It implies, therefore, that Catholics are not very smart because they cannot recognize simple arguments. The hatred is clearly visible and hardly contained. Let's continue. The PDN basically tells us, since you guys do not believe in science, you should listen to the head of your movement. Then underline the power of their argument they use by a specific term to reinforce their point, in case anyone would still disagree with their value signaling. They use the term Holy Father rather than Pope. It's not accidental. It's a deliberate choice to give more weight to their illogical choice, their illogical argument. We just demonstrated earlier that Catholics are not against science, rather are for humanist science based in truth and morals. But we are also against transhumanist science based on false pride and superiority. And the final push by the PDN is typical of the practices of the former owners of the paper. Here's how you do it. You pick and choose experts, you pick and choose excerpts from the declaration of the subject at hand. Here, Pope Francis. You juxtapose and link part of the declaration in order to make it sound exactly the way you want it to appear. Then you conclude by using a statement to finalize your point, sealing this way your narrow, twisted, and dishonest argument. This is exactly what the PDN did, concluding, Getting vaccinated is simple, but a profound way to care for one another, especially the most vulnerable. Who could resist such a strong emotional appeal coming from the Holy Father himself? And then Frenchie goes into some technical things about the Catholic Church, which I think most of our Catholic viewers already know, that there's a magisterium, and that what the Pope tells a reporter on an airline is not Catholic doctrine. He winds up by saying, at the same time, practical reason makes evident that vaccination is not, as a rule, a moral obligation, and therefore it must be voluntary. It's obvious to most, except for the radical partisans of our failed governor, that trying to turn the Catholics as scapegoats for the lack of foresight by Ms. Leon Guerrero is not acceptable. The editorial board of the Daily News, by showing their true anti-Catholic colors, did not help their champion's cause because they used flawed science to make a political point. Many of us are fed up with value lecturers who dare forcing on us their narrow point of view under the pretense that they know what's good for us. We are not some helpless island bumpkins and dimwits who need to be saved against their will by those who pretend to know what's best and cannot hide their disdain for our faith. Perhaps this is the reason the people pushing for that fear have little or no faith. Yeah, well, Frenchie called it. And I picked that up from Jungle Watch. You go online, junglewatch.info. It's been up there for quite a while. It's always really interesting reading. And if you've never been there before, give yourself a treat. And you can post comments. You can even post anonymous comments on Jungle Watch. So give it a shot. Okay, then we have the Post, which once again has a real editorial today. But let's take a short break and then we'll go to the Post.
Diving in, seeing our coral reef full of life.
I really love hiking the trails.
I really love going to the beach. The sunsets are amazing.
Your island needs you. Help preserve what makes our island home. Stop those who threaten our wildlife, plants, and environment. Install the free Toka app and report poaching, littering, burning, and other environmental crimes. Call 864-TOKA or install the free Toka app today. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Department of Agriculture, UOGC grant, and Choice Broadcasting.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
And now, back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Having a tough time with this chair today here. I keep wrestling with the chair, and the chair keeps winning. Okay, here's the Post. Good leadership values someone brave enough to offer a contrarian view. Now, I think everybody who's listening knows exactly who that is. It's Dr. Gwen. Here's how the editorial starts. Dr. Hua Gwen, for many on Guam who know him as a physician, a civic leader, a community volunteer, and a businessman, is a straightforward guy. He tells you the real score. The physician does not sugarcoat facts. He tells you in his mild-mannered way what's going on. There's no beating around the bush to get to his point. A lot of his candor probably can be gleaned from his background. A refugee from Vietnam, he became a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, was a state air surgeon in the Guam Army in the Guam Air Guard. After establishing his private practice, he eventually took a major step by starting American Medical Center 1 with a few of his colleagues and later American Medical Center 2. Gwen is an accomplished man, yet grounded at the same time. So when Gwen, in the confusing and somewhat chaotic days of the Wuhan virus pandemic in early 2020, was tapped to join the governor's Physicians Advisory Group, which is made up of volunteer doctors, it was reassuring that Gwen was a part of that, as well as other doctors in his league. Ultimately, he became the advisory group's chairman, chosen by his peers. Now, a year and a half into the pandemic, Gwen is out. He confirmed with the Daily News he's no longer an officially seated member of the advisory group, but he does plan to be in touch with group members who might need to hear him out. The straws that broke Gwen's resolve to remain part of the governor's advisory group were two recent decisions by the governor to, 1, effectively ban the unvaccinated from places such as restaurants and gyms. 2, essentially require employees in the hotel and restaurant industry to get vaccinated. While it's understandable that Governor Lou Leon Guerrero wanted to nip this new surge of Wuhan virus infections and hospitalizations in the bud, Gwen is of the view that the way to control the spread is to reduce the size of social gathering rather than ban an entire segment of people and essentially force people to get inoculated even when they have qualms about their body's ability to take a very new immunization. Quote, I can tolerate a lot of mistakes and a lot of things, but one thing I can't tolerate is taking freedom, Gwen said, explaining his departure from the advisory group he led. I'm a refugee and I left my country. I served in the Air Force for 24 years. People died for our freedom. The approach of mandatory vaccination and segregated vaccinated and unvaccinated, to me, is totally wrong. People live in a free country. It's interesting that we need to have a refugee, someone who was not born in this country, explain to us what our country's about.
Especially one that comes from Vietnam.
Yeah. And apparently our governor forgot. Although she made a big point of where she was born during the campaign, if you remember that, Jose. She was running against Ray Tenorio, and she had a little shout-out with Ray Tenorio. Ray, I was born here. Yeah. Gwen talked openly about his opposition to the latest restrictions ordered by the governor, so it was just a matter of time before he'd be out of the governor's circle of medical advisories. Gwen said, it's not about the governor. It's the principle. People need to have the choice. It's refreshing to see someone stand for a strongly held principle to respect people's freedom to choose whether to get vaccinated or not. Gwen, as a military veteran, has a deep understanding of the sacrifices people in the military took to protect our freedoms as Americans. There's no question the governor meant well when she imposed the restrictions. No question? Really? But there's also no question that there were other ways to prevent the spread of Wuhan virus without segregating those who are vaccinated from those who aren't, and without forcing those who are not taking the vaccine for various reasons to be vaccinated. In this instance, the voice of reason from Gwen and others of the same mindset was lost in the shuffle. Sometimes the true test of leadership is to value the opinion of someone who will go against your view. I use this expression sometimes. Sometimes leadership amounts to marching to the drumbeat even when the whole rest of the platoon is out of step. Yeah. There is value to a leader who surrounds herself with people who are not afraid to challenge or contradict her position, because the stake is so much greater if you don't try the contrarian view. Dr. Gwen, thank you for your service to the nation, and thank you for your volunteer spirit you've always had in you, from the medical missions to the typhoon-ravaged Philippines, to your civic leadership on the pandemic-stricken island we all share as home. And KUAM ran in a story on Gwen last night, and he repeats the quote, "Freedom is what people die for, and my family is a refugee, and I served 24 years in the Air Force, and I firmly believe that everyone to have freedom of choice. It doesn't matter what restrictions out there that the governor decided to do, but I think to mandate private companies and restrict unvaccinated people from their activity, their normal daily life, to me, you really violate the rights of the people. It doesn't mean that the fully vaccinated won't transmit what we see as 25 to 30% fully vaccinated. They come in with mild symptoms and they test positive. 25 or 30% of the people that are vaccinated. Wow. Gwen said the end result has been creating a division between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. He believes we should focus on limiting social gatherings and implement rapid testing instead of the PCR tests that are currently being administered at the old Tejon Carnival grounds. And the PCR test, you take it today, 24 hours later, we find out if you're positive. In the meantime, you could spread it around to half the island. Gwen says there's one that takes 15 minutes, and that's what we should be using.
If I'm not mistaken, the PCR test is being phased out next month.
I would hope so.
As being not reliable.
Gwen says he also supports vaccination because it decreases hospitalization. Ultimately, though, he believes the governor should listen to the Physicians Advisory Group. The governor has a lot of tough decisions. She has a lot of input from a lot of people, a lot of different levels giving input. But I think the challenge for her, she needs to pick the right group to listen to. And that's the thing. That's the key. And again, I keep saying this is a health emergency. And you know, you have a lot of physicians in this group, and they are the pulse of the community. Although he may be done with politics, the former head of the PAG says he will still be in the fight, helping with vaccination clinics, providing information to community, hopefully work with the Department of Education to come up with a standardized Wuhan virus protocols. Quote, "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home." He's not packing up and going to Honolulu. Everything we do is for this island. So, you know, although he was in the Air Force, you know, when you listen to, you know, everything, what he's done and what he stands for, I think the term here is Dr. Gwen is a good soldier, right? He is a good soldier. So I'm putting a blue star on this editorial as a proxy for Dr. Gwen. Let's give Dr. Gwen. He's exactly the kind of guy that we need around here, who tells it like it is, but he's like the old Timex walks. Nobody probably remembers this, but Timex used to put together a reliable, cheap watch, and their slogan was, "Timex, it takes a licking and keeps on ticking."
I remember that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I got the card coming up, but let me check and see who's in the green room here. Let's see, it's Martinez. Okay. I wonder if he wants to see the manager. Go ahead, Martinez.
Bob, do you give the governor credit for listening to the public and reducing her mandates?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, that's all I want to ask. I give her credit, too. She listened to the public. Give her credit. She reduced her mandates. Maybe she's admitting she made a mistake, but she said, I hear you. You know, you got to listen. That's all I want to hear, Bob, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
What was reduced?
She came out on Friday night and said, come 8 o'clock Monday morning. You know, the complete lockdown started. You couldn't go into any restaurant unless you were fully vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And then about 9 o'clock Monday night, no.
Yeah.
Friday night.
Friday night she said that.
No, Friday afternoon she said that. Then Friday night.
Then Monday night she gave her 9:30.
That's right. Monday night she comes out and says, I'm not going to enforce that until September 6th. So she backed off. It's still, the executive order's still there, but she backed off.
So I don't know what she listened to because it's still the same executive order.
Well, what she's saying is she caught everything that's going on, you know. In other words, there was some pressure out there and she succumbed to the pressure, would be one way of expressing it.
Maybe I'm being a hardball, but I don't look at that as listening to the people. I hear that as like pandering to the media.
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe so. Okay. So let's take a look at the card. And this is what I got on the card. I've got Biden versus ice cream. I've got GovGuam employees versus the governor, protesters. I don't have anything to present there, but when I talked to Adonis Mendiola yesterday, who I would suspect is at the protest, I told him if he wants to call and give us an on-the-spot report, I'll stop what I'm doing and entertain him. So I've got a couple of easily interrupted topics on the program today. I've got, as I said, Biden versus ice cream, Jane Flores versus women, and Gramsci versus lawyers. And then some holdovers from before, Chamber versus minimum wage, PDN versus the news, some of these old ones. So Biden versus ice cream. It's really not a fair fight because, and just to alert people to what I'm talking about here, you know, you see the media cartel running stories about Joe Biden going into a shop and buying an ice cream cone and then a picture of him eating the ice cream as though this is news.
Biden. Jess, what flavor did you get?
They actually did run that story, yeah. And of course, nobody says they're bending over for Biden or anything like that. So that's the framing of this story. But Biden against ice cream is not a fair fight because he can eat ice cream as fast as he wants to, and he never has to worry about a brain freeze. Can I hear the snare drums and the cymbals on that one? Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, next I've got Jane Flores versus women. And I touched on her column yesterday, and I'll go through it. And then I've got a lot to say about this, and I'm using her column as a platform to do it. August 26th is Women's Equality Day. We're supposed to commemorate the 1920 adoption of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. Well, it doesn't grant women the right to vote. I happen to have it handy here. Being a stickler for what the Constitution actually says. And it says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So as tailgaters know, from all the times we've rolled out our Law and Order notebooks, the Bill of Rights is a bill of negative rights. The Constitution doesn't say everybody has a right to this, that, or the other thing. The Bill of Rights tells you what the government can't do to you. And the 19th Amendment says the government can't stop you from voting because you're a woman. Women could vote in Wyoming in 1890. Yeah, there was nothing stopping women from voting except state law, right? And back in those days, we didn't have a national government. We had a federal government. And my recollection is that other states before the 19th Amendment passed had permitted women to vote. So when the 19th passed, it said no more state laws that say you have to be a man in order to vote. But going on, and all the gains, it says, and all the gains we made over the past 101 years. We've gained the right to earn equal pay for equal work, the right to be pregnant at work, to have an abortion. That's an important right. Yeah.
To the women unborn?
Yeah. And to serve in combat, to name just a few. In 2018, Guam elected our first MAGA Haga, Lourdes Leon Guerrero, and in 2020, our country elected its first female vice president, Kamala Harris. But the fact that we're still talking about women's equality is proof that we have yet to attain it. No. It's proof that as long as you keep doing that, you'll never attain it. And I'll explain later. This pandemic affected women more than men because women are the majority employees in workforce sectors most heavily impacted by it. Women are usually the primary caregivers of children and elderly parents. The closure of child and elder care centers last year forced society to finally recognize caregiving as valuable.
You know who closed those care centers down? A woman.
That's progress. While testifying at the legislature earlier this year in favor of Bill 71-36, the, quote, Support for Women-Owned Business Act, now Public Law 3626, I was asked if women gained 50% ownership in Guam businesses, they now represent 17 to 22%, would the legislation still be needed? Senators, I pray for that day, was my response. The second thing about equality, you know, as long as you do the Holly Ruskin type of rent seeking and justify it as leveling the playing field, no, you're not going to get the equality that way. I pray for the day that my eldest daughter is not seen as a female engineer, but just as an engineer. Well, I have an autobiographical take on this. I mentioned this before, but when I started law school 50 years ago in New Mexico, out of 100 new students, 12 were women. This was so earth-shaking that it made the front page of the Albuquerque Journal. You know, UNM enrolls 12 female law students. We thought that was just shocking. Well, nowadays, I still stay in touch with my alma mater. Some years there are more women than men in incoming classes. When I came back here in 1974 to practice law, we had something that was an oddity, a woman lawyer. One woman lawyer. Janet Weeks was a woman lawyer. The same Janet Weeks that wound up her career as a justice on the Guam Supreme Court. Known, loved, and respected by all. The second female lawyer was Nancy Nye. And then after that, people quit talking about it. You know, we didn't talk about the new woman lawyer. We just talked about the new lawyer. And what, you know, in our own evaluation, What kind of law do they practice? Are they tough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know now if we have a majority of men or a majority of women practicing law in Guam as members of the Guam Bar Association. I could take the time to count, but frankly, my dear, I just don't give a damn because it's not important, because women showed that they packed the gear to do the job, and they didn't have to rely on this, the first woman from Swarthmore to be admitted to the bar of Rhode Island or something like that. So, if you're really looking for equality, show that you pack the gear and you can do the job. And that goes with engineers too. We started out with engineering being primarily something that we've characterized as for males. But there are female engineers, female architects on the island, and if they pack the gear, they'll do well. If they don't, they won't. And if you can avoid the temptation to run to the government seeking equity, that half the engineers in this jurisdiction must be females, etc. She goes on to say that pilots who are women are not mistaken for flight attendants because they represent less than 6% of the profession. Now, I have an interesting autobiographical story there also, and that's this. You all remember when the Korean Airlines plane crashed at Nimitz Hill. Well, there was a TV magazine on at one time, hour-long programs where some investigative reporters went out and did workups on like 11 different air crashes, and that was one of them. And what they found was that some of the aids to navigation weren't working. A federal and a local were not working. They found out that it was a rainy night, not a very good night, not so bad that the flight would be grounded, but it was raining. That the crew was at the very limits of their permissible flight time before fatigue would become a factor. So they may have been just a little bit on the tire side. But the real clincher was this, that the cockpit recordings showed that the crew was hollering, "Pull up, pull up, pull up." And by the time the captain decided to pull up, it was too late. So it turned out to be a controlled flight into the ground. So Korean Airlines really took this very seriously. It changed its name from Korean Airlines to Korean Air, if you didn't notice. And they hired United to come in and do a complete workup and training program to improve safety. This wasn't the first time they'd had a crash. And United Airlines perhaps borrowed the same kind of logic that the Post used today and Dr. Gwen, broke that kind of a cultural hang-up where subordinate members of the crew would not speak to the captain even though they saw that the captain was going to crash. It was one of these rank, prestige, seniority, I suppose you have to use the C word there, perhaps cultural. So they did that. So to me, the best airline you can fly is Korean Airlines. And one of the first times that I flew Korean Airlines, we were sitting in the waiting area, and, you get there and you see the crew parade on into the plane. They're the first ones that board. I'm sitting there, and I see the crew, and the first person in line is a female, 4 stripes on her sleeve, a female captain. And I said, that is great news, because to me, that signified that they've broken this idea that you can't tell the captain to stop, you're crashing. So once again, women who pack the gear perhaps can become pilots. But we're not going to go from 6% today to 50% tomorrow. Okay, let's take a short break here. We got about 8 minutes to the halftime.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
A homeowner's policy protects much more than just your house. It also protects you against claims from someone being hurt on your property. If a visitor is injured at your place, how much are you covered for? The smart thing to do is get the answer today.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Mezcla, read all about it. Check out Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tuman for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet, the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tuman, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
So here we are back again for another 6 minutes or so. That's the entertainer from the movie called The Sting. Paul Newman and Robert Redford. It played on Channel 39 here about a month ago. I've seen it probably 5 times, but if it comes on tonight, I'll probably watch it again. It's a great movie. Okay, so back to Jane Flores. The truth is, while women have made vital gains in many areas of society, we still struggle to have our voices heard. You know, like in the legislature, like the last legislature, there were only 10 women there. And, you know, like the governor, like a female governor, and, you know, one like former Chief Justice of the Supreme. Yeah, you really have a hard time making your voices heard. Let's see, or someday even our president is no longer labeled by her gender. Well, who's labeling? Are we saying Joe Biden, a man, is president? Kamala Harris, a woman, is vice? Is that what we're doing?
But you do remember Joe Biden was going, I don't know who's going to be my vice president, but it's going to be a female woman of color.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's the kind of thing you got to stand up against.
Exactly what she was picked for.
Exactly, yeah. That, well, you know, she is a woman, and she had her own way of making it to the top, didn't she? Yeah. So, okay, going on. The truth is, while women have, as you were, nowhere is this struggle more apparent than in our domestic violence and sexual assault rates. On Guam, across the U.S. and around the world, men are still beating women. Yeah. So giving rise to that old begging of the question. I've had to explain a couple of times what begging the question means. It doesn't mean making a statement that makes you curious. What it means is phrasing a question in such a way that to answer the question, you have to assume that the premise of the question is true. So as an example, hey, Joe, when did you stop beating your wife? Or, Joe, are you still beating your wife? Still sexually assaulting women at alarming rates. In the U.S., 1 in 4 women, or 25%, experience intimate partner violence. The rate for men is 1 in 7, or 14%. 9 of 10 rape victims are female. I wonder why that is.
You know, there's a missing context in here, and I'm not saying that this is completely false.
Yeah.
But a lot of men aren't in these statistics because they don't report it.
Uh-huh.
And that's something that needs to be discussed also, but it's not going to be in this article.
No, it's not. So much is taught to women about how to protect yourself against sexual assault and how to safely exit a domestic violence situation. But true women's equality will mean teaching men not to sexually assault or beat a female, teaching men to respect the women in their lives. Well, with all of this Me Too movement, you know, haven't we come an awful long way in just a really short period of time on that? But you know, it's a sad thing that this is a problem, and I don't doubt that it is a problem. You just read the newspapers here, and you see it's happening all the time. I don't know if that's something that can be handled legislatively. Every man that raises his hand against a woman shall be locked up for the rest of his life. I don't know. This attitude has to start with our young boys. Because, guys, if you don't think your little ones are listening to your disparaging comments about women, you're wrong. This is exactly where they learn it. Until respect is brought into the equation, true equality between men and women will continue to be just an illusion. True equality. I keep thinking in terms of equality nowadays, meaning equity. Okay, let's go to the big halftime show, and I'll come back to this with some more interesting anecdotes.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
The ISIS attack puts pressure on the mission. I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News.
We will not let them stop our mission. We will continue the evacuation.
The terror attack in Kabul that killed 13 U.S. service members, wounded 18 others, and possibly killed more than 100 Afghans is adding pressure to evacuate Americans and their Afghan allies.
We will respond with force and precision at our time, at the place we choose, in the moment of our choosing.
An affiliate of ISIS called ISIS-K claimed responsibility for the attack. Former President Trump's blasting the Biden administration for bungling the withdrawal from Afghanistan. He tells Fox News,
"It's so sad. It's probably from the standpoint of military tactics and just embarrassment, the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to our country. We look like fools all over the world."
NATO issuing a statement a short time ago telling all foreign forces they must evacuate their citizens and embassy employees from Afghanistan by Monday, August 30th. That's one day earlier than the U.S. deadline. The Supreme Court strikes down the federal moratorium on evictions. Late Thursday, the High Court ruled it's up to Congress to continue any moratorium. 7 Capitol police officers attacked and beaten during the Capitol riot are suing former President Trump and others.
The suit claims the former president, his longtime ally Roger Stone, and 2 extremist groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, incited the mob that overwhelmed Capitol security. The court action says the events that day violated the Ku Klux Klan Act to commit domestic terrorism. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
And a down day on Wall Street, the Dow lost 192 points. America's listening to Fox News.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Here at Guam Auto Spot, we have the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars. Like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage. As low as $127 per paycheck, 0 down. Or this 2021 Buick Encore. As low as $237 per paycheck, 0 down for 72 months. Call 478-AUTO to schedule a test drive or get pre-approved online at guamautospot.com.
Yes.com.
New Orleans is in the path of another major hurricane. Tropical storm Ida, swirling in the Caribbean, is expected to strengthen into a Category 3 storm before making landfall on the Gulf Coast Sunday.
Anybody who is in that cone, roughly from Houston all the way over to Mobile, Alabama, obviously they should have their hurricane supplies and hurricane plan in place.
Dennis Falcon at the National Hurricane Center. In the West, wildfires still causing havoc.
The pictures of the Lake Tahoe Basin where thousands live are filled with hazy, dark smoke. At more than 135,000 acres, the Caldor fires already destroyed more than 600 homes and other buildings as crews work frantically to stop the fire from heading toward Lake Tahoe. Incident meteorologist Jim Dudley says the wind, thankfully, is going to stop.
We're going to have very light winds aloft. Therefore, up on the ridge tops and on the very critical east side of the fire, we're not going to have the aiding effect of the south winds moving, trying to push the fire that direction.
Dry, breezy weather, though, is expected for much of the Great Basin, Sierra, and Central Rockies as 92 large fires continue to burn across the West. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
And college football's Pac-12 announces it's done with expansions for now.
The unanimous decision coming just days after the Pac-12, Big Ten, and ACC announced an alliance that ultimately aims to stabilize a volatile environment throughout college athletics. Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkov focused on helping the current schools in his conference.
It makes me incredibly happy and prideful to meet the student athletes that we get to do our work for the benefit of.
This announcement from the Pac-12 is actually good news for the Big 12 as they look for viable options to expand, with both Texas and Oklahoma heading to the SEC in 2025. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
And I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Diving and seeing our coral reef full of life.
I really love hiking the trails.
I really love going to the beach. The sunsets are amazing.
Your island needs you. Help preserve what makes our island home. Stop those who threaten our wildlife, plants, and environment. Install the free Toka app and report poaching, littering, burning, and other environmental crimes. Call 864-TOKA or install the free Toka app today. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Department of Agriculture, UOG Sea Grant, and Choice Broadcasting.
Michelob Ultra presents the GSPN in Must Met Good competition. Guam's strongest man and strongest woman will be determined Saturday, September 11th at the Paseo Grounds. Come watch our island's strongest compete in the Triple J Truck Pull, the Paradise Fitness Clean and Jerk, CTD and Pacific Tire Tire Flip, the IT&E Wheelbarrow Course, the Guam Army National Guard's Warrior Walk, and the Isla Imports Mini Truck Lift. There'll be a beer garden and food truck, so leave your chow and drinks at home. Who will be Guam's strongest man and strongest woman? Find out Saturday, September 11th.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahasi.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Another great halftime show here on Tall Tales. And Jose, I'm sure you noticed there wasn't a single player out there on one knee.
Not one.
Not a single one, yeah. Okay, so we're still working on Jane Flores versus women, and I've got some kind of interesting material here from a book that I read before there was such a thing as a Kindle, so I can't find the book. And I, as I recall, I bought it in Australia, and the title of the book is Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. And I'll tie this into Jane Flores's question about equality, but Ron McNench wants to talk about Korea Air, so we'll let him jump into the middle of this, and then we'll go back to why men don't listen and women can't read maps. Go ahead, Ron.
Hey, Holiday Thunder, Holiday Guam. Yeah, I was, I had just a couple of trivial comments to mention quickly, and then I was going to mention something else, and that is Wyoming really let women vote early on because they wanted to draw women to the territory because they had population concerns. And so there was a great kind of advertising, give women better political rights, get them to move to your jurisdiction or territory. So that was one of the elements of letting women vote so early, and it was kind of a neat concept, a novel concept for its time. On the Korean airline issue, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a very good book a few years ago called Outliers, and I think he talks in specific about the case of the Korean airline crash on Guam and about the cockpit culture of Korean Air at the time, and the very kind of dictatorial nature of many of the pilots. But there's a little bit of trivia about the Korean airline crash that some people don't really know about or follow very closely, and that is the Barry Smalls, who was a New Zealand helicopter pilot who was on a tuna boat, was on that flight, and he got out, and he said that what happened was when the plane crashed, most of the people lived. They survived the crash. But in the overhead bins, there was a lot of duty-free alcohol and duty-free perfume that really filled the cabin with this mist of alcohol. And this flame went through the cabin and burned out all the air, apparently, according to Smalls. And he said that airlines in the future should look at dealing with this alcohol misting problem for these kinds of crashes. And it's just something that when you look at the reasons that people perished in that crash, it was largely due to that factor. Very, very sad. I have to say that just a lot of unseen work done by our first responders on Guam that were there at that scene. It was just absolutely incredible. Many of them were my students, and the stories they came out with following that crash were just very honorable and showed the highest degree of wanting to help as a first responder. One other quick thing about men and women is that law schools, you did mention this, and I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I remember and I recall just in the last year or two, the majority of students now in law schools are women. It's a fairly strong majority too, and so many law schools have women attend them. I think that Benjamin Franklin said that women make the best accountants, so he was an early advocate of encouraging women to go into the accounting profession. I think that in general, the point that you made is exactly right, and the question is, do women have the merit ability to do the job that they want to do? And if they do, merit is merit, and they should be able to do it. And I think that that's probably my view on women versus men. And the point about domestic violence, there was a time everywhere in the world, and including the United States, when the government stayed totally out of the household, and they didn't regulate any behaviors between married couples or within families hardly at all. And so I think we've come a long way as a society in general on a lot of these things. And it doesn't mean we can't get better, but I think that we have a lot to be appreciative of, that we've made a lot of progress in our society.
Well, thank you, Ron. A very, very interesting input. Thanks for sharing.
Hey, have a great day, sir.
Thanks. Well, if I step back and look at it, I want to see women have the greatest participation that they're capable of in society. And I have a selfish reason for that. More than half the population is women. I want to get the most out of them. I want to make use of all of their abilities and talents, etc. And I don't want to see any artificial barriers that would deny me the benefit of all that talent. And when it comes to violence, I think I've mentioned this before, but we've all heard of the rule of thumb. And this goes back to English law. In English law, up until not too long ago, the doctrine of coverture was in place. Coverture meant that when a man and a woman married, they became one. That's coverture. And the one was the man. And the man was responsible for the woman's debts, for her tortious conduct, etc. So so since the man was completely responsible, the culture way back, say in 1700s, was that if a man had to discipline his wife with a stick or physical violence, well, that's the way it was. So a famous British jurist named Coke, as you were Cook, spelled C-O-K-E, you'd think it's Coke, but it's Cook, established a rule for England that a man could never use a switch larger than his thumb on his wife. That's where the rule of thumb came from. So the doctrine of coverture, lasted a long, long time. And like everything else, when the law changes, it doesn't necessarily mean that the culture changes overnight, or that when the culture changes, it doesn't mean that the law changes overnight. I remember my own upbringing. My mother's identity was Mrs. John Klitzkie. It wasn't Ruth Klitzkie. So when she'd sign her name to something, she would sign Mrs. John Klitzkie. And that was the norm for back in those days. And I remember, I think it was when I was back in law school, that women got uppity, so to speak, about the difference between Miss and Mrs. What difference does it make if I'm married? So that's where MS period, Ms. came from, so that you could refer to a female as Ms. Klitzkie, and that way you didn't know if married or single. And that caught on so quickly that there was a magazine catering primarily to the distaff side called Ms. So things have changed an awful lot just in my short lifetime. Now, I have a book here, Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. And the point of this book is that men and women are not the same. Obviously, their external plumbing is not the same, but the differences go beyond that. And I have some of the material here that I'll just spend a little time on. It was a sunny afternoon, and Bob and Sue set out with their 3 teenage daughters on a lazy drive to the beach. Bob was at the wheel, and Sue sat beside him, turning toward the back every few minutes to join the animated series of conversations going on among their daughters. To Bob, it sounded as if they were all talking at once, creating an incessant barrage of noise that just didn't make any sense at all. Eventually, he'd had enough. "Can you please shut up?" he yelled. There was a stunned silence. "Why?" asked Sue eventually. "Because I'm trying to drive," Bob replied. The women looked at each other in complete confusion. "Trying to drive?" they mumbled. They could not see any connection between their conversation and his ability to drive. He couldn't understand why they were all speaking simultaneously, sometimes on different subjects, with none of them appearing to listen. Why couldn't they just keep quiet and let him concentrate on driving? Their talking had already caused him to miss the last turnoff on the highway. The fundamental problem here is simple. Men and women are different. Wow.
You don't say.
Yeah. Not better or worse, just different. Scientists, anthropologists, and sociobiologists have known this for years, but they have also been painfully aware that to express this knowledge publicly in a politically correct world could turn them into social pariahs. Society today is determined to believe that men and women possess exactly the same skills, aptitudes, and potentials, just as science, ironically, is beginning to prove that they are completely different. And where does this leave us? As a society on extremely shaky ground. It's only by understanding the differences between men and women that we can really start building on our collective strengths rather than on our individual weaknesses. In this book, we seize upon the enormous advances that have recently been made in human evolutionary science and show how these lessons applied to male and female relationships. The conclusions we unearth are controversial. They are confronting. They are occasionally extremely disturbing, but they give us all a solid and thorough understanding of the many strange things that happen between men and women. If only Bob and Sue had read it before they had set out. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, got it. Line 1. Yeah, good afternoon.
Hoffa day, Bob. Uncle Bob.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor.
Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
Great. We're really excited. We're here in Agania, right in front of the Guam Congress building, also known as I'm going to butcher it. The Guam Legislature, folks, right across the church.
Legislature in Guahan. Yeah, okay.
There you go. I'm just excited, out of breath, too, running around here. Yeah, we're still down here right now. There's a whole lot of people. We've got probably well over 125 people, and that just keeps growing. And a lot of these aren't the same faces, so it's wonderful to see fathers, mothers, and kids out here and getting the reception from folks driving by. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's good, Adonis. So I thought you were going to be at the governor's office, but you took it to the legislature, huh?
Well, the People's House needs to grind out some meaningful legislation that stops the mandate, stops the hate, stops the segregation, because we're here to rally and march for freedom, and we're not going to hesitate.
Sounds good. It sounds good, Adonis. Let's see what. Can we give Adonis a big hand there, Jose? There we go. Yeah.
God bless America. God bless Guam.
Yeah. Well, and God bless you, Adonis. Thanks for stepping out and taking a stand.
Sir, plenty of good people on this island who've been vaccinated. They know too. They had a choice. They want us to have a choice too. And we choose to take charge of our health and our life and our livelihood. We just want the government to get out of the way, please.
Very good, Adonis. Thank you for the on-the-spot report.
Thank you. God bless you.
All righty. Okay, I've got Frenchie on the line, but Frenchie, let me finish this up, and then we'll get to you. I'm sure you have some really interesting things to say about woman equality. So let's see here. Well, I just stumbled across this. How many men does it take to change a roll of toilet paper?
How many men, Bob?
It's unknown. It's never happened. I've got an interesting paragraph here. It'll take me just a second to find it. This book will show you how to enjoy and benefit from the knowledge of the opposite sex. But first, you must understand its history and evolution. Here's an anecdote. On a visit to Windsor Castle in England, an American tourist was heard to say, "It's a wonderful castle, but why did they build it so close to the airport?" So this book was written by two Aussies. So he killed two birds with one stone there, right? How did we get this way? And this I think is the part that I really kind of picked up on. I must have read this 15 years ago, and I think I was in Australia when I read it. But once upon a time, a long, long time ago, men and women lived happily together and worked in harmony. The man would venture out each day into a hostile and dangerous world to risk his life as a hunter, to bring food back to his women and their children, and he would defend them against savage animals or enemies. He developed long-distance navigational skills so he could locate food and bring it home, and excellent marksmanship skills so that he could hit a moving target. His job description was straightforward. He was a lunch chaser, and that's all you expected of him. The woman, however, felt valued because her man would put his life on the line to care for his family. His success as a man was measured by his ability to make a kill and bring it home, and his self-worth was measured by her appreciation for his struggle and effort. Family depended on him to carry out his job description as a lunch chaser and protector and nothing else. There was never any need for him to, quote, analyze the relationship, and he wasn't expected to put out the garbage or help change the diapers. The woman's role was equally clear. Being appointed the childbearer directed the way she would evolve and how her skills would become specialized to meet that role. She needed to be able to monitor her immediate surroundings for signs of danger, have excellent short-range navigational skills, using landmarks to find her way, and have a highly tuned ability to sense small changes in the behavior and appearance of children and adults. Things were simple. He was a lunch changer. She was the nest defender. Her day was spent caring for children, collecting fruits, vegetables, and nuts, and interacting with other women in the group. She did not have to concern herself with a major food supply or fighting enemies, and her success was measured by her ability to sustain family life. Her self-worth came from the man's appreciation of her homemaking and nurturing skills. Her ability to bear children was considered magical, even sacred, for she alone held the secret to giving life. She was never expected to hunt animals, fight enemies, or change light bulbs. Survival was difficult, but the relationship was easy. And this was the way it was for hundreds of thousands of years. And of course, the word evolution came in here. So if you didn't fit into those things, you'd be sorted out of the gene pool. If you weren't a good hunter, you wouldn't be able to reproduce. So hundreds of thousands of years, this kind of got imprinted into the human psyche. After the meal, survival was difficult, but the relationship was easy. And this was the way it was for hundreds of thousands of years. At the end of each day, the hunters would return with their kill. The kill was divided equally, and everyone would eat together in the communal cage. Each hunter would trade part of his kill with the women for her fruit and vegetables. After the meal, the men would sit around the fire, gazing into it, playing games, telling stories, or sharing jokes. It was a prehistoric man's version of flicking TV channels with his remote control or being absorbed in a newspaper. They were exhausted from their hunting efforts and were recuperating to begin the hunt again the next day. The women would continue to tend the children and make sure the men were sufficiently fed and rested. Each appreciated the other's efforts. Men were not considered lazy. Women were not seen as their oppressed handmaidens. These simple rituals and behaviors still exist among ancient civilizations in places like Borneo, parts of Africa, Indonesia, and among Aboriginal Australians, New Zealand Maoris, and the Inuit of Canada and Greenland. In these cultures, each person knows and understands his or her role. Men appreciate women, women appreciate men. Each sees the other as uniquely contributing to the family's survival and well-being. But for men and women who live in modern civilized countries, these old rules have been thrown out, and chaos, confusion, and unhappiness have been left in their place. If you were born before 1960, you grew up watching your parents behave towards each other based on the ancient rituals of male and female survival. Your parents were repeating the behavior they learned from their parents, who in turn were copying their parents, who mimic their parents, and back it goes to the ancient cave people and their clearly defined roles. Now the roles have changed completely, and parents don't know how to help. The divorce rate for newlyweds is now around 50%, and taking de facto and gay relationships into consideration, the real breakup rate for couples is likely to be over 50%. We need to learn to set new rules in order to discover how to be happy and survive emotionally intact in the 21st century. That's what they said. So I don't know if I buy into the chaos, et cetera, and I see what has happened as actually being salutary, because we don't live in caves anymore. We're not hunter-gatherers. We're primarily urban people, and the changes that came about, like almost all the changes that come about, are brought about by changing circumstances, not because somebody had a better idea. So, but still, when humans get used to doing something a certain way, they don't stop doing it just because it doesn't work anymore even. But I think that one of the things that Jane has to take into consideration, that men and women are different. And they do have different skills. Somewhere in the book it says that women have better peripheral vision than men. But men have better long-distance vision, tunnel vision, actually. And that's because they're out there looking for the game or for the animal that wants to kill them. The women are keeping track, and it's still that way, according to this book. So these things stay with us for a long, long period of time. Book says that men should drive at night, because although women have better eyes, men have that tunnel vision looking straight ahead and are likely to see danger before the woman. Okay, let's break for the seventh inning stretch. I'll come back and wrap this up, and then we'll go to France.
The UOG Endowment Foundation is hosting Community Connection, an outreach that connects the community to programs and organizations at the University of Guam. Join them at the Micronesia Mall Center Court on Saturday, August 28th from 11:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Learn more about scholarships, the G is for Giving campaign, different programs at the university, and be entertained by the Triton's Collective Dance Team. For more information, please call 735-2957 or email them at info@uogendowment.org. Biba UOG.
So here we are, Wrigley Field in Chicago, and just gazing up, I'm out in the center field bleachers looking in towards home plate, and I noticed there are signs on the first base side that say vaccinated only. On the third base side, the sign says unvaccinated okay. So I don't know, is our governor a Cubs fan? Just going back here to Jane Flores for a moment here in women. Bonnie Suba posts and says, Bob, when the liberals came in and changed, and that's where the problem arose. Because the liberals, the folks over there on the far left, the identity politics folks who say that these are just social constructs, and the only reason that women don't prosper is because they're shoehorned into these roles by a systemic sexist society. Well, women are better than men at some things, and men are better than women at other things. Not all women are the same, and not all men are the same. As an example, combat. I've talked about a week ago about Marine Corps boot camp and what it was like over 60 years ago. I don't think any woman that I ever even saw, not much less met, could have handled it. Now, there probably are women that can handle the real rigors of combat, but you might have to go through 500 women to find one. So women, as a group, have great variation amongst their ranks. So when we talk about what women can do and what men can't do, you know, if Benjamin Franklin were alive today, he would be scorned as a sexist by saying women make good accountants. Because the liberal view is man, woman, it doesn't matter. Engineering, accounting, combat, being a bricklayer, a pipe fitter, none of it matters. It's all a social construct. So that's my advice, Jane. Remember that men and women are different, that women have some things are perhaps better at some things than men are, that you're not going to get anywhere by saying, we want to be equal, we want to be equal. You have to go out and show that you pack the gear to be equal, like my example with lawyers, and you will. But the more you talk about it, like I want my daughter to be referred to as an engineer, not as a woman engineer, the more it's probably going to happen. So end of that story, and now we're going to head for France. Afternoon, Frenchie.
Good afternoon, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good. Thank you for putting a little shine on my little column from yesterday.
Uh-huh.
But, yeah. I heard you, but I was driving, so I have to be careful.
Okay.
So anyhow, yeah, I kind of concurred with you regarding in our lifetime, a lot of things have changed regarding a relationship, or even the way what women had access to. I remember when I was a child, my parents had their own business, so we left a month ahead of my dad, and my dad would close for 2 weeks and then join us, and we would go in southern Spain because he was very affordable, beautiful, and there was a lot of things to do for young families. And when we were in Spain, I remember that my mom could not book the hotel unless my dad had a notarized letter allowing her to do so. Can you imagine nowadays?
Yeah.
And you know, and my mom was not a shrinking flower. You know, she was one of the France's first rally pilots that was a woman, and she did all kind of things on her own. She had her own show business, and she was no shrinking violet. I actually remember when I was about 12, seeing her jump over her own bar with a blackjack. I don't know if people remember what a blackjack is, and hit a guy that was 3 times her size over the head, and then pulling him outside by pulling him by the ear. So she was not very impressed with macho guys, but our culture was very macho in the south of France. We had at every meal, the ladies would eat in the kitchen and the men would eat in the dining area. And one day I'd asked my great-grandfather, who was still alive, why we did that, because when I was next to Paris, you know, we all ate together. And he said, well, that way women can talk about the things they want to talk about without irritating us. So it was definitely another world. And, you know, there was another book in the 90s, in the 90s that was quite interesting, was written by a woman in California, but it was called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And basically it was going over how both sexes looked at the same issue and saw 2 different things. And I think I still have the book somewhere. But there is a Canadian psychologist called Jordan Peterson, and you might have seen some of his books floating around.
Yeah.
And also he's quite present on YouTube and those kind of things. Who is the enemy of all what modern women want, you know, because basically he's telling them, he's a clinical psychologist and he teaches at the University of Ontario in Canada. And he said, you know, there are a lot of things beside patriarchy and beside there is no such thing as toxic masculinity. There is masculinity and there is femininity, and basically we are equipped to look at the world in different ways, which is exactly what you were talking about. And then of course there is culture. The culture in the northern countries like Sweden, Norway and everything is very equalitarian amongst sexes, yet they have the most differences in jobs and choices. For example, you were talking about engineers. Engineers are still 90% men, and according to him, is because of the skills that it takes to be an engineer, which are very different. And he said this is also the same reason that 90% of nurses are women, because women are caring, they are more willing to listen and everything, and therefore it takes that set of skills to become a nurse, while it takes a different set of skills to become an engineer. And engineers are not the most funny people to be around, because those skills are to be very concentrated and being very careful at what they do and so on. So it's very interesting. And as a matter of a little joke too, I was watching the Taliban takeover of Kabul the other day, and there was a CNN journalist dressed with a hijab, so which is just the thing around her head, but still showing her face. And she was interviewing some Taliban hoodlums that were in the streets, and they were actually eating ice cream. I think they probably did it on purpose to make fun of Joe Biden. But she was asking them the questions, well, are women going to be able to be in the parliament, and are they going to be able to be ministers, and blah, blah, blah. Obviously, she had her own agenda. And those guys didn't seem to understand. One of them spoke a little English, but the others not at all. They only spoke Pashto, and so she had a translator. And when the translator was finished translating, those guys just bursting out laughing and everything. And he explained that there was a reason they took all the rainbow flags out, and they didn't need women in government. You know, so it's very interesting. It's definitely Thomas Sowell had done some research on that. On the culture is more important that a deciding factor that the so-called patriarchal society, because it's very different. And he was showing, like in Europe, if you are in Sweden, Norway, people act a certain way. If you are in Germany or in England, people act a certain way. If you are on the northern border of the Mediterranean, people have a tendency, like the Latins and the Greeks, have a tendency to be quite male-oriented, but at the same time, they're very equalitarian with the women. While if you cross the little pond and go in Northern Africa and in the Middle East, then the culture is very different and very male-centric, and almost asking females to be quiet and invisible. So it's very interesting, and it shows that what's her name,
Jane Flores.
Flores is advancing is a lot of malarkey. It's wishful thinking. You know, it's quite interesting to see that she's talking about violence against women, while if you look in our society, especially the one she despises, which is the leftover of a Victorian Anglo-Saxon paternalistic view, where actually the man was responsible to protect the ladies around him. There was a certain code about opening doors, making sure the ladies were taken care of, and so on. Now it is viewed as an insult to the woman. And those same women that are demanding that men no longer do that, demand that men are not aggressing women, while they are actually trying to take away the masculinity of those same men. And what does that mean? This is not how you get equality, by putting down the other sex. And to finish with my mother's own observation, my brother has a tendency to always end up with the same kind of girlfriends who are strong intellectual women but are very anti-male. And one day he had an Australian girlfriend who was a professor of English literature at the University of South Carolina or something like that. Very smart lady, but my mother kept calling her Tchaikovsky. And I asked her, why do you keep calling her Tchaikovsky? I don't understand. And she said, you don't understand? Isn't it obvious to you that she's a nutcracker? And, you know, she's 92 years old now, and she still has that approach to life, and she can recognize those women out of the blue.
Very good,
so
Frankie.
that was our little input today. It's kind of slightly comical, but unfortunately, some of those ladies are very radical, and their agenda is not one of equality, it's one of demasculinization, you know.
True enough.
And I would hate to see what young people are going to have to deal with in the near future. All right, you take care.
Thanks for calling, Frenchie. Yeah, Frenchie's always a treat. Yeah. So,
Tchaikovsky, huh?
Yeah. Just a couple more things here before I go on to the next item on the card. We had a poster here named Jose Martinez that when I was talking about coverture, about, back in the day, back in the English common law, when a man and a woman got married, the doctrine of coverture meant that they became, in a sense, a single entity. And Jose Martinez said, that happens in Mexico too. When a man and a woman get married, they become one. Very good, Jose. Yeah, and the Western culture, it was always the man's duty to protect the woman. And that, I don't know if people do this anymore or not, but if a man and a woman are walking down a street, the man's supposed to walk on the outside. And the reason was that there was a time, horse and buggies, et cetera, that water, mud, et cetera, would splash, and it wasn't supposed to get on the woman. And when you came to a door, you opened the door for the woman and let the woman go in first, except if you're going into a bar. If you're going into a bar, you open the door, you walk in first, the woman follows right behind you. This tells everybody in the bar, don't try to hit on this woman, she's with me.
It's not to see if your wife is there first.
No.
That's pretty good. I never thought about that.
And if you stop and figure it out, the two strongest instincts in mammals, which is what we are, self-propagation and self-defense and propagation of the race, having offspring. So when it's men and women, one woman can have a child every year for a long, long time. And without women having children, you could have 1,000 men and no women, and you're done. It's over. So the women are the essential element in all of these customs and traditions, Western customs and traditions, grew up around that. Unfortunately, some of the Eastern customs and traditions did too, but in a not very salutary way. Okay, so let's head for Churchill Downs.
Here at Guam Auto Spot, we have the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars, like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage, as low as $127 per paycheck, 0 down. Or this 2021 Buick Encore, as low as $237 per paycheck, 0 down for 72 months. Call 478-AUTO to schedule a test drive or get pre-approved online at guamautospot.com.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Here we are, Churchill Downs, a home stretch for another week. We've got 2 really horrendous days coming up. No tall tales, no tailgaters. It's tough, but Jose and I always survive, and we're always back at 1600 on Monday. But it's tough on us, and I know it's tough on all you tailgaters out there, too. But we'll make the best of it. Next item on my card is Gramsci versus lawyers. Antonio Gramsci is somebody I talked about before. He was an Italian communist, and he picked up where the Frankfurt School kind of left off. Frankfurt School started in about 1922 in Germany, and it was a group of rich communists who decided that workers of the world were not going to unite, that there would not be a violent revolution to overthrow the capitalist class. And they decided that the way for communism to survive, for Marxism to survive, was to infiltrate the institutions of capitalism, the schools, the universities, entertainment, etc. And by hollowing those out and turning them towards Marxism, ultimately Marxism would triumph. Well, Antonio Gramsci picked up on that, and it probably is the best distributor of that dogma that there has been. He talked in terms of a long march through the institutions, starting out small and working up to the point now where if you follow the news, universities don't want free speech. They only want leftist drivel. And our government is more and more influenced by Marxists, the Squad and the national level, as an example. And sad to say, this article is about the American Bar Association. And the title of it is "The ABA's Long March Continues." State Supreme Courts seem content to allow a leftist cartel to impose ideological conformity on America's law schools. This is really serious, because if every law school, 90% of the people in every law school buys into this identity politics, critical race theory, long march ideal, it'll ruin the country, because lawyers have a lot of power. It's unfortunate, but true. Nothing better exemplifies the Gramscian long march through the institutions than the role of the American Bar Association in transforming America's legal establishment. The ABA, with over 400,000 members, bills itself as the world's leading legal association, and indeed it is the largest voluntary professional organization in the world. Founded in 1878 to represent the interests of elite corporate lawyers, the ABA now includes judges, law professors, court administrators, paralegals, government lawyers, non-practicing lawyers, and even law students. Once a bastion of conservatism, having opposed many New Deal initiatives supported by President Roosevelt, the ABA is now a liberal organization whose policy positions are often indistinguishable from those of the ACLU and other activist groups. Critics charge that the ABA is essentially a trade association for America's 1.3 million lawyers, a cartel. Befitting its role as advocate for this powerful interest group, the ABA claims to have more than 3,500 entities supported by 900 staff and thousands of volunteers. As a special interest group, this makes the ABA a behemoth. The ABA's influence is projected in a variety of ways: lobbying and issue advocacy by ABA officials and affiliated nonprofit initiatives, controversial, biased evaluation and rating of judicial nominees, proposed ethical rules for lawyers, filing amicus briefs, policy positions adopted by the quasi-legislative House of Delegates, and honoring partisan figures with awards, as the ABA's Commission on Women in the Profession did in 1992 when it recognized Anita Hill as a woman of achievement. Anita Hill is the woman. She was the Christine Ballsy Ford of Judge
Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas, yeah. It recognized Anita Hill as a woman of achievement following her discredited charges against Justice Clarence Thomas at his Senate confirmation hearing. The ABA is, of course, a voluntary organization and accordingly is free to take openly political positions with its annual budget of nearly $100 million. Without compulsory dues, the ABA is not constrained by the First Amendment pursuant to the Janus case, unlike unified state bar associations whose political advocacy is being challenged in court. Large law firms, which account for a large portion of the ABA's dues revenue, share many of the left-leaning attitudes promoted by the ABA, as reflected by the mega firms' increasingly woke pro bono activities. For the most part, the ABA's political advocacy takes place in the open, where it can be monitored, challenged, and resisted. Alternative groups, such as the center-right Federalist Society, have proven very effective in combating liberal activism through intellectual debate. Of far greater concern is the ABA's influence over America's law schools by virtue of its unwarranted role granted by state Supreme Courts as accreditor of institutions whose graduates are permitted to sit for bar exams necessary to practice law. No one would attend a law school if its graduate were not eligible to take the bar exam. And I'm going to come back to this on Monday because I'm getting down to the meat of this article. And as I say, it's very serious. Okay, tough it out over the weekend. Tall Tales survives. We'll be back on Monday. We'll see you then.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Some evacuations end. I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. Countries including Canada and Australia say they won't evacuate any more people out of Afghanistan. But President Biden says American efforts will go on despite yesterday's terror attacks.
We will not let them stop our mission. We will continue the evacuation.
The president calling the 13 U.S. service members killed in the attacks and 18 troops wounded heroes.
Heroes who've been engaged in a dangerous, selfless mission to save the lives of others.
The Taliban says the terror attacks outside the Kabul airport killed at least 72 civilians. COVID cases keep rising. On Thursday, the U.S. saw more than 161,000 new cases, with nearly 1,300 people losing their lives. Late last night, the Supreme Court struck down a federal eviction moratorium put in place to protect people during the pandemic.
Despite the Biden administration's attempt to extend the temporary ban after the court essentially warned the White House against it just weeks ago. In a 6-3 decision, the court ruled if a federally imposed eviction moratorium is to continue, Congress must specifically authorize it. Justices Breyer, Kagan, and Sotomayor dissented, the White House press secretary saying the Biden administration is disappointed and that the president is calling on cities, states, landlords, and cabinet agencies to urgently act to prevent evictions. Sean Langell, Fox News.
California's Caldor fires just miles away from Lake Tahoe, prompting one community there to issue an emergency declaration. South Lake Tahoe is urging residents and tourists to be ready to evacuate if the fire gets too close. And people on the Gulf Coast are keeping an eye on Tropical Storm Ida. America's listening to Fox News.